Welcome everyone, let's break down Sandman episode 3. I will cover all the Easter eggs, references, the differences between the comics and the show, and at the end I'll give my thoughts on the episode as well. If you're brand new to the channel, I'll be doing more of these, so make sure to subscribe, and of course heads up for the spoilers if you haven't seen episode 3 yet. We'll start at the beginning and work our way through shot by shot. After the last episode, Dream has a rough idea of where his precious items are, and the quest to get them back begins. In the previous episode, Dream sets his sight on Johanna Constantine first, deciding to head off to London and get his sand back, and that's who we see first in this episode. The episode 3, Dream a Little Dream of Me, adapts the third issue of the Sandman comic, where the occult detective and corn artist John Constantine assisted Morpheus with finding his stolen pouch of magical sand. The role of John Constantine from the comics is gender swapped, and the Netflix series adaptation presents a female version of John Constantine named Johanna Constantine. John Constantine was originally created by Alan Moore as a supporting character for Swamp Thing in 1985. The character proved popular and soon earned a solo series, Hellblazer, in '88. 1 year later, author Neil Gaiman gave John Constantine a major role in the opening arc of The Sandman and created John's ancestor, Lady Johanna Constantine, as well. Originally in the comics, Johanna Constantine made a cameo appearance during the Doll's House story arc. Neil Gaiman explained his reasoning behind using Johanna rather than John. Basically, he figured adapting the show meant bringing it to an audience who doesn't necessarily know or care about the star of Hellblazer showing up. And he was already de-emphasizing the connection to the wider DC universe for similar reasons, and we covered that in the review of episode 2, so it made the most sense to take the ancestor character he'd created himself for the comic and have both past and present Constantines played by the same person to make the connection more immediate than just the name. Then it also turned out the show couldn't use John even if they wanted, because J.J. Abrams has been blocking any use of John Constantine in live action while he produces a new Hellblazer show, so it all shook out fine in the end. However, I think it was a mistake that the actress Jenna Coleman played two different characters 300 years apart. She played the role of John Constantine in the present day as Johanna Constantine, and she played John's ancestor, Lady Johanna Constantine, in episode 6. Given that she tries to make a bargain with Dream in episode 6 to not age and be immortal, I just think it will be confusing for some viewers, and the plot is a bit muddled with this. But in short, these two are not the same character even though they are played by the same actress. They're just ancestors. This episode begins with Johanna Constantine walking in an abandoned theater. In the lobby, there's a poster advertising Mucous Membrane, here spelled Mucous Membrane, and this is a name of John Constantine's punk band, originally referenced in issue 11 of Hellblazer, but the band is also referenced in the Sandman comic as well. In the theater, Johanna was approached by a young girl named Astra, who brought Johanna to see her father, who laid passed out on the floor next to a book of satanic rituals. Johanna finds out they had summoned demons, and when trying to investigate further, she was pulled inside a room. However, it turns out that this whole sequence was all a dream, and Johanna wakes up in a taxi in London. Later in the episode, we find out Johanna was dreaming of a memory. She was combating some kind of a demon, and Astra comes in to check in on her when the demon grabs the young girl and tries to drag her to hell. Johanna closes the portal, but it is shown that she's only holding Astra's hand and wrist, as the rest of her was sliced clean off as the portal closed. Dream will use this as leverage to get Johanna to help him find his pouch of sand in exchange of him getting rid of this memory so Johanna can finally get some sleep. This whole dream or memory sequence is largely a faithful adaptation of the Newcastle Incident, first depicted in Hellblazer issue number 11. Newcastle was Constantine's first real encounter with the supernatural. A sexually abused child had summoned a demon to kill her abusers, and Constantine decided it would be a good idea to summon his own demon to combat this monster. Of course, things go wrong, and the demon Constantine summons is not properly controlled, and it destroys the monster summoned by the child and drags the child to hell. John suffered a nervous breakdown and spent several years after the incident in an asylum, tormented by recurring nightmares of a girl named Astra being dragged through a portal into hell and being left clutching her severed arm. Johanna Constantine experiences the same nightmare in the show, and Morpheus confirms that her nightmare is no fiction of his, but a true memory of Johanna's past. Thankfully, John was eventually able to rescue Astra from hell in his late 40s, and this is portrayed in Hellblazer issue number 96. The opening shot of Johanna Constantine's nightmare shows her pulling up outside an establishment called the Casanova Club. This was the name of the club where the Newcastle Incident took place in the comics. The club's owner, Alex Logue, also makes an appearance in the episode. After she exited the taxi, she had a brief exchange with an older lady named Mad Hettie. Hettie warns Constantine that Dream of the Endless has escaped his captivity and is back out in the waking world seeking his missing artifacts. However, Johanna was never one to believe in mere superstition, unknowingly bypassing Dream himself as she proceeds into the chapel to perform an exorcism. Mad Hettie is a mysterious figure appearing in Sandman and Hellblazer, with her first appearance being in Hellblazer issue number 9. She constantly complains about the youth of today and has a large role in a spin-off comic called Death, the High Cost of Living. Having lived 247 years at the time of Dream a Little Dream of Me, it is later revealed that Mad Hettie hid her heart from death.
Morpheus, the Oneiromancer.
Oneiromancer is another title for Morpheus. It literally means one who predicts the future by the interpretation of dreams. By the title in science fiction, fantasy comics has a more generic meaning of magician, so Oneiromancer here probably means wizard with power over dreams. Before Constantine gets involved with Dream, we get to see her take on one of her occult jobs. She is summoned to officiate a wedding, but it's not just any wedding, it's a royal wedding between a princess and a famous footballer that needs to be done in secret. It's revealed that Rick the Vick summoned Johanna Constantine in Netflix's The Sandman to secure her help in banishing a demon she believes has taken possession of a British princess. This seems to be a nod towards Royal Blood, which is a 4-part storyline which pits John Constantine against the demonically possessed British prince, unnamed for legal reasons, who was taken over by the same demon responsible for the Jack the Ripper killings over a century earlier. John Constantine's friend Rick the Vick also gets a gender flip. The original Rick the Vick was first seen in Hellblazer issue number 60 as part of the group of friends assembled for John's 40th birthday party. As the secret ceremony is underway, Johanna discreetly performs an exorcism, evicting a demon from the room, and before long, Dream turns up and tells Johanna that the demon is called Agilieth and he's from Hell. This is also the name of a minor demon who appeared in Hellblazer issue 196. Agilieth claimed to be the brother of Nergal, who once gave John Constantine a demonic blood transfusion. Agilieth is used to confirm to Johanna that Morpheus is indeed the Dream Lord, and Agilieth promises to tell Dream which demon took his helm in return for the princess, and Dream seems keen to oblige until Johanna sends the demon back to Hell. The chemistry between Johanna and Dream is pretty interesting. You can tell that he holds her in high regard. There's mutual respect between them even when they don't see eye to eye. Of course, it doesn't take long before Dream asks for his pouch of sand, and she doesn't have it on hand. Dream explains to Johanna that without his pouch of sand, his realm will cease to exist, and if dreams disappear, then so will humanity. Johanna has a straight-to-the-point attitude about everything, and this is a very important moment in the episode. When Dream tells her about the potentially dire consequence of losing his sand, even though she plays it off with a few snide remarks, Johanna will remember this conversation, and it will play a crucial part of us forming an opinion of Dream's character and his priorities later in the episode. But Dream convinces her to help him since he'll promise to take that painful memory away. Johanna also points out a raven is nearby, which upsets Dream because he instructed Lucien he does not need a new raven. And with Jessamy dead in the first episode of the show, Dream is in need of a new raven even if he doesn't think he is. And this new raven is Matthew. Matthew is outspoken, loud, and the show basically uses him for comic relief, which doesn't really resonate well with a good portion of comic fans. Matthew revealed he only just became a raven as of a couple of hours ago. Prior to that, he was a man who died in his sleep. The comics go into more detail, revealing that the Sandman's Matthew was Matthew Cable from Swamp Thing. He was a friend of Alec Holland, who became Swamp Thing, and first husband of Abigail Arcane. Matthew in the comics only technically died in his sleep. He was in a coma, entered the dreaming, and was given the choice by Morpheus. He then woke up long enough to wreck his own life support, sparing his ex-wife from the guilt of doing it, so he only died in his sleep if you count coma as sleep, and Morpheus apparently does. Dream in the comics specifically says some mortals are given that option, so not everyone who dies in their sleep gets this option, of course. Matthew doesn't appear in the comics until the Sandman issue number 11. So where is the pouch of sand? Well, it turns out that Johanna left the sand with her old girlfriend Rachel, but that was 6 months ago and the pair set out to find what happened to her. While John Constantine is not in Netflix's The Sandman, his best friend and chauffeur does get a shout out in the series. Cab driver Chandler and his wife Renee are mentioned when Johanna confronts her ex-girlfriend Rachel, and Rachel lists a number of Johanna's friends she tried calling to learn why Johanna seemed to be ghosting her. This is rather amusing as the Renee Chandler in the comics does not approve of John Constantine at all and would likely punch anyone who would suggest he was a friend of hers. Rachel also mentioned Oliver and Sarah. Sarah briefly briefly dated John in Hellblazer, and Oliver was John's boyfriend during the Constantine to Hellblazer run in 2015. To clarify, these are different Sarah and Oliver to Black Canary and Green Arrow, both original characters to different Hellblazer runs. Rachel also mentions someone named Kit Ryan, which is a name of special significance to John Constantine fans. Kit was John's girlfriend throughout much of Hellblazer and is widely considered to be the great lost love of his life. All of these names and love interests underscore the Sandman's commitment to its source material as well as the queerness of its characters. John Constantine is one of the most high-profile bisexual characters in DC Comics. Even though John Constantine is replaced by Johanna, this enables the Netflix show to keep Johanna and Rachel as former partners. And the subplot about Johanna and Rachel's relationship definitely adds some weight to the story. The two quickly make up over Johanna walking out on Rachel, but all is not what it seems. It quickly becomes evident that Rachel Johanna is talking to isn't the real Rachel. And Rachel then began to disintegrate into sand as Dream entered the apartment and awakened Johanna from her sleep, revealing that she dreamt her entire encounter with Rachel. As Dream says, the pouch of sand is not meant for mortal hands. Dream and Johanna find out that Rachel has become addicted to the sand and the dreams that come from it, causing her body to wither away. Evidently, this is what happens when a mortal spends too much time with a key fragment of Dream. In the comics, inside a house that looks abandoned for at least 6 months, they find an unconscious creeper, a burglar who has broken into for the thrill of it and is now being eaten by dreams, as well as the remains of Rachel's father who turned into a wall of flesh. Constantine himself is nearly dragged into dream space, but is saved by Morpheus. The way that Rachel obtains the pouch in the comics is slightly different. In the comic, she's a junkie who habitually steals from Constantine. She takes the sand and is eventually consumed by its power, but it's clearly not Constantine's fault. The TV show blurs those lines. Johanna didn't know the power of the sand, but Rachel's death is, at least in part, down to her simply taking off and abandoning her. Since Dream has what he wanted in the sand, cold and detached, he goes to leave, explaining that the sand was the only thing keeping her alive and that she'd be dead soon. So Rachel is suffering, but Dream is ready to just leave since he got what he came for. Once again, as in the previous episode, it's been reiterated how Dream is selfish and cares only about his items and the dreaming. But in this episode, it's much more believable as Johanna directly confronts Dream about it and refuses to simply leave her to die, telling Dream to do something. When Dream says there's nothing to be done about Rachel, Johanna reminds him that he's the one who said he needed the sand back for the sake of humanity, and if humanity is so important, there's a human being in pain right there in front of him.
But you want your sand back so that you can save all of humanity? Well, here she is!
And here we can clearly observe Dream's actions and how they confirm what Corinthian told Lucienne at the end of the previous episode. Dream cares only about himself and his kingdom. And after Johanna pleaded with him, Morpheus put Rachel out of her suffering with one last peaceful dream of Johanna before she passes. In the episode, we're also introduced once again to John Dee. John Dee, also known as Dr. Destiny, is a supervillain from the DC Comics universe. He originally appeared as a criminal scientist who can see and create people's dreams with the Meteoriopticon using Dream's ruby. As Morpheus remained imprisoned at the time, he was unable to prevent him from misusing the Dreamstone's immense power, and these actions impacted the waking and the dreaming worlds to such an extent that the Justice League intervened and sent Dee to Arkham Asylum. At that point, it became necessary to remove his power to dream, and while he was in Arkham Asylum, doctors removed his ability to dream in an attempt to neutralize his dream-based powers, and this caused him basically to waste away to a human skeleton. He first appeared in the comic series Justice League of America issue number 5, however he has a different appearance in the show. After Dee's mother Ethel gave him Morpheus' Dreamstone, over the years that he wielded the Dreamstone's power, he says in the show that he modified the artifact to further his own desires. In the show, Ethel Cripps attempts to convince her son John Dee to return the ruby to Dream. However, John has other ideas. In prison, he had plenty of time to do extensive research on who he actually is, and he learns that his life is a lie, that his father was Roderick Burgess, and Ethel Cripps almost had aborted him. John Dee's major motivation in the comic is to use the Dreamstone to make the world mad, so they would have no choice but to accept him as king. In the show, after years of being lied to, he simply wants to use the stone to make people tell the truth. Ethel tells John to give the ruby back to Dream in exchange for forgiveness, but he's not so keen on the idea. He claims that he's altered the ruby so that it only works for him. If you're wondering how Ethel Cripps still looks relatively young despite being over a century old, it's thanks to the amulet of protection she got from a demon in exchange for giving it Dream's helm. As she talks to John, she eventually removes the amulet and hands it to her son, thus making her age rapidly and decay until she's dead. In the comics, while his mother Ethel Cripps does visit him in jail, it's brief and they don't discuss his father or reconnect, and John is later informed of her death by a guard. Ethel's haunting rapid aging doesn't happen in the comics. Also in the comics, after his mom's death, John gets sent the amulet. So the amulet is the same amulet for which Ruthven Sykes traded the helmet to the demon. With Ethel dead and armed with the amulet of protection, John makes his way out of the hospital, filled with grief, and kills everyone who stands in his way. This is a brutal scene, but the whole dialogue with Ethel is supposed to nudge us into feeling a bit of empathy towards John Dee. He is portrayed as a broken, troubled man who wants to be loved by his mother and not lied to. And even though all of the scenes between Ethel and John have been greatly expanded, adding some nice character beats like John coming to terms with his heritage, both actors play their parts amazingly well and they fully sell this weird mother and son relationship. Finally, and for the third episode in a row, the Corinthian shows up to try to manipulate events, this time by, giving John a coat. Yeah, that's all he does in this episode. However, we're not done with John Dee, we'll see more of him in the upcoming episodes. The episode ends in London with Dream informing Johanna of her ex's passing. Johanna tries to convince Lord Morpheus that not all humans are bad, something Dream acknowledges since he knows Johanna is not like Roderick Burgess. And after she leaves, Matthew finally convinces Dream to allow him to accompany him to Hell, which is what we'll cover in the upcoming episode. How you feel about Dream a Little Dream of Me will likely depend on how you feel about what's been done to the occultist formerly known as John Constantine. And I'm not talking about the gender flip or name change, but the fact that this version of the character significantly differs from John in the comics. However, Dream's and Johanna's scenes have chemistry and they provide some necessary exposition. And one of my issues with the previous episode was that the motivations for Dream's quest and gifting brothers the egg were too vague to be dramatically satisfying. And here we get a concrete explanation for why all of this is important. If he doesn't get his items back, then the dreaming will cease to exist, and if dreams disappear, then so will reality. And this episode is an improvement over Imperfect Hosts, largely thanks to the strong focus on both Morpheus and Constantine. Most important of all, finally we're getting a sense of who Morpheus is as a protagonist and how his perspective is often quite different from our own. He has to be convinced to grant Rachel a peaceful end, and it's clear that his view of humanity following his imprisonment is still rather cynical. And through the confrontation with Constantine, he finally realizes there's more to us mortals than Roderick Burgess. Like I already said in the review of the previous episode, my preference would be for the show to establish the issue with Morpheus and his character, how he perceives humanity, him being narrow-minded, selfish, obsessed about his items, etc., and then take those problems through at least a couple of episodes, emphasize those challenges and inner struggles, and only after that I would begin the transformation of his character. But what we're seeing in the show so far, we established the issue very early on, almost at the beginning of the season. We can say episode 2 we got some hints, and in episode 3 we have the confirmation through his actions. And as soon as we did that, we're giving partial solutions to that character arc. So the inner journey of a character usually leads to a much more satisfying conclusion if we emphasize what the problem is. But so far, it's always been, here's a problem, you don't get to sit with it at all, you don't have to understand it, because in the same episode, we give you a partial solution to that problem. And that makes me care less about this character. And that's my biggest issue with the season so far. Walking that gray line of inner struggle and contradictory behavior is fine, but I just think it's too early in the season to walk that line, to showcase what Dream's problems are and at the same time start changing him immediately. It's too soon. It would have been enough to have that confrontation with Johanna, and the show even did one thing better than the comics, where Dream promises to rid Johanna of her nightmare if she helps him. So he uses that as leverage, whereas in the comics, at the end, John just asks for that as a favor and Dream does it. So even that self-interest nature of Dream works better in the show, but then it's all cancelled out at the end of the episode when the viewers are being spoon-fed the underlying meaning by Dream concluding that humans are great too, and he was maybe wrong. So once again, everything we went through in the episode loses power. And it's the second episode in a row where this happened. So it's just a bit demotivating, if not slightly annoying for someone familiar with the source material. but we'll analyze how the show takes this character development further and if it hopefully builds out to a satisfying conclusion. Let me know in the comments whether you agree with my assessment or not, I'm really curious. Alright, The Waking World, that was my breakdown of episode 3. If you enjoyed it, like the video to give it a boost and subscribe to be notified of the upcoming episodes. I also created a playlist where you can watch all my other breakdowns as well. This was Heads and Tails, till next time.